factored into investment policies and strategies? What does it entail in practice? How can RPI influence stock selection? How do we integrate RPI into management of portfolios and assets? In terms of in terms of just my introduction, I just wanted to start by quoting Charles Sanders Peirce, an American philosopher. I can't say that many people will know him. I don't think he's eminently famous, but some of his words have struck me as being particularly relevant to the nature of our discussion today. He said that all of the evolution that we know proceeds from the vague to the definite. And I think that responsible property investments, RPI, can be said to be on that timeline. Within this rapidly changing environment and challenging global economic conditions that we find commercial real estate investment in, RPI is evolving, and it continues to evolve. What perhaps was niche is becoming increasingly mainstream, where perhaps instinctively or intuitively it felt right to consider ESG issues. So some of you may well recall the doing well by doing good mantra. There's now demonstrable evidence that indicates that benefits attributable to consideration of ESG criteria exists. So today's webinar coincides with the imminent publication of UNFI PWG's Property Working Group's latest report, What the Leaders Are Doing, Best Practice Report. This being a refreshed and updated version of our first ever report several years ago. And therefore, by implication, I guess, an indication of how the RPI agenda has moved forward down this timeline. So we have a range of speakers. I'll just introduce them purely by name, and individually they will elaborate on what their position, what their stakeholder position is in terms of the commercial real estate activities they're involved in. We'll first hear from Nina Reid, the Director of RPI at Prupim in the UK. She'll take us through the key elements and the rationale behind the new report, which is great because she has been the lead author. We'll follow that by hearing from a range of stakeholders. Laurie Weir, Senior Portfolio Manager at CalPERS in California. James Gray Donald, Vice President Sustainability at Bentel Kennedy in Canada. And Peter Connolly, Development Director at Igloo Regeneration in the UK. So I hope you find their comments to be of interest and value. And with that, I will pass over to Nina. Nina.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody on the call. For those of you that haven't come across Prupim before, I thought it would be good just to give a brief introduction to ourselves. Prupim is a top 25 global real estate fund manager. We have around £16 billion worth of assets under management worldwide, and that equates to around 700 properties across the UK, Europe, America and Asia. We ourselves, as Prupim, have a long history of being involved on the responsible property investment agenda. We are shortly due to publish our own RPI report, which will be our 9th report in this area. So our involvement in this project very much supports our own strong RPI principles that we integrate into our fund management practices, and also the view that we want to highlight and promote these practices to others within the industry. Today I'm just going to run through briefly, particularly for those of you on the call that are not so familiar with responsible property investment, what it actually is as a concept, why we're seeing investors in the marketplace all across the globe adopting responsible and property investment principles within their investment approach, what we specifically who sit on the UNFI Property Working Group have been doing to promote RPI, and how some of you out there might be able to use this report when it's published in the next few weeks to understand and improve your own approach on these issues. And then following the kind of brief introduction to the report, I will pass over to our other speakers to actually tell us what are the leaders doing. Next slide, please. So what is responsible property investment? I think that there are a number of different definitions and terminology used widely in the industry. RPI isn't the term that's used by everybody. People still use sustainability, but broadly, responsible property investment is an approach to property investing that recognises that there are environmental and social considerations that, along with the more conventional financial obligations that we have as fund managers and real estate investors, that we must consider. And these considerations do go beyond minimum legal requirements, with the view that we as investors and asset owners should be looking to improve the environmental and social performance of the property, which ultimately then leads to things like urban revitalisation or the conservation of natural resources. Next slide, please. So why are we seeing investors adopting RPI principles within their investment approach? There are a number of reasons, and I think that one of the key ones is that there is a growing recognition through real estate fund managers and investment managers that issues such as climate change, resource scarcity, increasing urbanisation, and the changing expectations we have as a society will all have significant impacts on macro economic property investment trends. All of these issues therefore present medium to long-term risks and opportunities to the performance of property assets and businesses as well. Therefore, increasingly those that seek to understand these issues and the impact that they might have on buy, hold and sell decisions could ultimately help enhance their long-term performance and differentiate them compared to those that aren't considering these issues. Next slide, please. The second reason that I wanted to touch on why investors are adopting RPI principles within their investment approach is to do with the regulatory environment. Whilst the regulatory environment is obviously different globally, it would be fair to say that we're increasingly seeing in a number of markets the regulatory environment already and the direction of travel becoming more stringent on a range of environmental and social issues. For example, for those of us that work in the UK, there's been a government announcement last year that we, by 2018, will no longer be able to let poorly performing buildings in terms of energy performance, which clearly could have a significant impact on the performance of our assets. In particular, a lot of this legislation focuses around the need to improve buildings, and it follows through that less sustainable assets will probably require a greater expenditure than those that are highly sustainable assets. Therefore, if that's not been factored into the investment model, they are likely to deliver poorer returns. And many of the investors that we spoke to as part of the best practice report believe that those who were adopting and understanding these new standards before they came in were well placed to outperform competitors and also understand the risk profile of their portfolio. Next slide, please. The next reason why we're beginning to see investors adopting RPI principles are tenants and occupiers. Due to fairly similar reasons across all markets, tenants are increasingly demanding environmentally efficient buildings. Reducing occupational costs is a key driver, coupled with seeking to reduce companies' environmental impacts. We're obviously seeing a large number of global corporates worldwide coming out with fairly robust and stretching environmental strategies, and they're beginning to filter that through to the real estate portfolio in which they occupy. This, of course, is driven in part in the likelihood that much of the world energy prices and energy will increase over time. In some parts of the world, we're likely to see increased water scarcity, and the increasing cost of resources and transportation will all rise, means that we're increasingly likely to see trends for tenants preferring to occupy greener buildings. Therefore, we're likely to see that income growth from such investments will be superior to that from less sustainable and arguably over time less desirable stock from a tenant perspective. Next slide, please. The final reason why we're seeing investors adopt RPI principles within their investment approach is that a number of fund managers and asset owners believe that by adopting such principles, we're seeing better communication and collaboration between all parties involved in the investment and occupation of real estate. And ultimately, this is helping reduce fragmentation and the misalignment of interests that we sometimes see in the sector. And ultimately, that will have the benefit of improving building quality, both for tenants and investors. Next slide, please. So moving on more specifically to the UNEP FI and the report that this webinar is pre-launching. For those of you that are not so aware of the work of the UNEP FI, United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative is a unique global partnership between the United Nations Environment Programme and the global financial sector. This work encompasses over 200 financial institutions who are signatory to the UNEP FI statement, and the work involves developing and promoting linkages between sustainability and financial performance. Now, specifically within the real estate sector, the work is carried out by the Property Working Group, of which ourselves, PRUPIM, and others on this call are members. Next slide, please. The Property Working Group has been running for a number of years now and has well over 20 members representing asset owners, fund managers and real estate companies across the globe. And the primary work and aims of the Property Working Group is to promote and encourage responsible property investment by assembling evidence to show how it can protect and enhance financial returns throughout the life cycle of buildings while reducing negative environmental social impacts. To date, for those of you that haven't seen them, on the website, the Property Working Group has published a number of toolkits and reports that seek to demonstrate how the principles of RPI can be applied to assets, portfolios and financing. And as Andy mentioned at the start of this call, the most recent publication, What the Leaders Are Doing, is a follow-up from the first report that was published well over 5 years ago now, showing how the sector has moved on since the publication of that first report. And it's quite interesting to compare just the number of initiatives that have occurred since that publication of that first report. Next slide, please. So once the report is published in the next couple of weeks, how can this report actually be used by the real estate industry? Essentially, the report is structured around each stage of the investment process. So there are sections on how investors are considering these issues within strategic asset allocation, how fund managers are considering these issues as part of acquisition decisions, how this is being integrated into day-to-day asset and property management, how fund managers are implementing these principles in their engagement with tenants, and through these case studies, we would hope that it highlights to organisations around the world what others have been doing to apply RPI principles, what they perceive the benefits of this approach to be, and thereby this report can be used by others in the real estate industry to provide examples of how investors might implement these practices themselves. Next slide, please. And I will now pass back to Andy.
Nina, thank you very much for that. Ordinarily, I would try and summarise a couple of the key points out of the presentations, but on the basis that we started a few minutes late, and I do really want to leave at least some time at the end for questions, I'm going to move straight on if that's okay. So, Laurie Weir, if I can ask you to make your presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. And thank you for the opportunity to share CalPERS efforts regarding ESG integration. So CalPERS is the California Public Employees Retirement System. We are a fairly large pension system that operates under a core requirement of fiduciary duty, which means that our board and staff must at all times work in the best interests of our 1.6 million members. And we pay benefits, retirement, and other benefits to our members, and 66 cents of every dollar of pension benefits comes from return on investment. So sustainable long-term return on investment is critical to the CalPERS mission. My role is CalPERS has created a new program within the investment office called the Targeted Investment Programs. And this is a broad-ranging program within CalPERS that includes in-state or California-focused investment strategies, emerging manager programs, diversity efforts, and ESG integration efforts related to real assets. And our real assets asset class includes real estate, infrastructure, and forest land. Next slide, please. CalPERS total fund, working from the macro to the micro, our goal is to be principally effective investor, and ESG integration efforts are critical to our of being a principally effective investor. At the total fund level, we have ESG efforts. The G would be alignment of interest through our corporate governance work, which is largely through our corporate governance and global equities unit, efforts regarding shareholder rights, executive executive compensation, and in our private asset classes, which would be private equity and real estate, our governance efforts are through fund manager terms and conditions. At the total fund level, we are also focusing on climate change related to resource scarcity. This would be in the ESG capital, in the ESG integration efforts. And S for CalPERS is human capital. So the social is human capital. We focus on fair labor practices, health and safety, and diversity. Next slide, please. Now focusing from the total fund to specifically real estate ESG integration efforts. In 2004, we launched an energy efficiency initiative, a 5-year goal to reduce energy consumption in our core real estate portfolio by 20%. We exceeded our 20% goal and reported out in 2010 that we approached a 22% energy reduction across our core real estate holdings. And in 2012, CalPERS and our 6 core real estate managers joined the ULI, that's Urban Land Institute Greenprint Foundation, and for the first time we'll begin documenting CalPERS-owned assets into the Greenprint Carbon Footprint Index. This carbon footprint report will provide each of our managers with their carbon footprint, as well as CalPERS with a rolled-up report of our carbon footprint that we hope to use to drive continued improvement and energy reduction throughout our core real estate portfolio. We look upon ESG integration efforts as helping us gain a better understanding of risks and challenges and opportunities in real estate, and to, importantly, as Nina mentioned in her remarks, enhance our long-term performance. Next slide, please. Our social efforts in real estate include our responsible chapter policies. CalPERS does not want to make investment performance on the backs of poorly paid and poorly benefited workers. In fact, it's important to CalPERS that all of our real estate returns include the employees that work at those assets receiving fair wages and benefits based on local market conditions. So our responsible chapter policy effectively establishes the requirement that construction workers and service workers in CalPERS be paid fair wages and benefits based on local market conditions. We do not require union labor, but we do require, the policy sets out certain requirements relating to bidding notifications, who qualifies as a responsible contractor, neutrality requirements in the event that there is an effort to unionize the staff at CalPERS-owned assets, and the policy also establishes annual reports to CalPERS, and CalPERS staff rolls those up in an annual report to the board. Our governance efforts in real estate focus on alignment of interests, and this alignment of interest is really focused on aligning CalPERS interests with the interests of our external real estate investment managers, and this is through extensive contract documents where our policies and procedures are embedded in those documents. We will be, in the coming year, surveying all of our external investment managers and consultants for what they are doing in the ESG integration space. And as a result of that survey, we will be, for the first time, developing a set of expectations for both our internal staff and our external managers around ESG integration efforts. This past year, CalPERS has produced its first report as an entire enterprise on sustainability. The report is called Towards Sustainability, and it is available at our website at www.calpers.ca.gov. We look forward to producing sustainability reports, approximately one every 2 years going forward. And we look forward to reporting back out to this group, perhaps in a future webinar, on the outcome of our manager survey and the expectation document that we will be creating. So that ends my remarks, and I think our next speaker is James.
Laurie, thank you very much for that presentation, and indeed I think we're catching up a little bit on time, which is great. James, if we can pass over to you, James from Bentel Kennedy, to make your presentation, please.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I'll take over from Lloyd just on the real estate investment and property management side. So Bentall Kennedy serves the interest of about 500 clients, about 140 million square feet. Our largest clients are pension funds such as CalPERS, BCIMC, Sun Life, and our total assets under management, about 29 billion. Just over half are office, but then split also with retail, industrial, residential. We're Canada and U.S. based. Historically, Vancouver and Seattle had offices, but now talent is located across North America. And next slide, please. What I want to showcase today are 3 examples of projects that highlight RPI in practice. So the first is in Denver, and the picture at the bottom right is of a new building. And in the bottom right of that picture, there's open land, and this was the rail yards in Denver behind Union Station, which had sat vacant for quite a number of years, as is the case in many Midwestern U.S. cities where rail yards and the downtown core had been in neglect for a while. And there was a city, the city itself decided they really wanted to redevelop. It was looking for progressive developers and models to rejuvenate transit-orientated development. So the Multi-Employer Property Trust, they're the pension fund in the U.S. that's a pension fund of mostly union labor construction. And so we helped build a lead core and shell building. While the area average is about 60% union labor, we achieved 100% union labor for construction. We required that all tenants achieve or try to achieve LEED commercial interiors, and all the ones in the 95% of occupancy have. Achieving 95% occupancy in a tough real estate market in the United States at the moment is, I think, a very significant accomplishment. And the building will provide a strong financial return. Part of the way the project was approved, and it's the first very large building in the redevelopment, was the synthesis between the objectives of the city around trying to provide living wage employment, as well as model buildings that can tell a good story. Next slide, please. The other is Bentall Kennedy wanted to drive environmental efficiency improvements. But was finding that if you go building by building, the costs can be fairly high to achieve a certification or to implement some standards. So Bentall Kennedy was one of 11 partners who worked with the U.S. Green Building Council to develop the volume certification program for LEED existing buildings. And I believe there are a number of large companies globally which are now trying to roll this out to hundreds or even thousands of properties. And in the first iteration, we did 28 buildings, and with a much lower cost per building, and with the highlights that energy savings were found that add up to roughly $1 million a year, and 37% reduction in water use, and then as well as purchasing of more renewable energy credits. We're looking at a second phase to do this to basically the remaining office buildings which would qualify for this type of program, and that process will probably take 2 to 3 years going forward. Next slide. The last program is one that I think for a number of people is common. There's temporarily high vacancy level in the building. In this case, we purchased a building and the major tenant was hurt by the recession. So 18 floors became available with a longish lead time. So we were able to look at complete refurbishment of the space. It's an old iconic building in downtown Boston. And we planned a complete retrofit of those 18 floors, new energy management systems. The walls have been, drywall has been put on layer after layer, so we were able to strip that back to allow more daylight in. Replacement of water and light fixtures, and a neat feature is when you put your ID card to get on the elevator, and people in the morning, there are lots of people doing that. Then the elevator uses its intelligence to figure out which elevator you should go to in order to minimize the number of elevator trips and stops. We were able to get a high-profile tenant, an investment bank, through a long-term lease, and the lead credentials and a few of the other things were instrumental in achieving that. So I think in conclusion from our side, while there aren't perfect numbers to say going LEED or doing the RPI leads to a higher return on value, but we have countless examples in our portfolio where that does seem to be the right direction to go, and there's an intuitive sense, though not a perfectly documented cause and effect, that this is the right way to attract high-profile, longer-term tenants and to de-risk your portfolio. Thank you.
James, thank you very much for that. Moving swiftly along, Peter Connolly, if we can ask you to make your comments as well, please.
Thank you, Andrew, and hopefully everybody can hear okay. First slide, please. I work for Igloo, which is a UK-based specialist investment fund, specialist sustainable investment fund managed by Aviva Investors. We're relatively small by comparison to the other funds that are talking today at around £250 million, but we are defined by the fact that all of our investment decisions are governed by our footprint policies. A copy of the policy, together with an update note called Footprint in Action, is available from our website, and I'm sure that details can be obtained for that. All of our decisions, all of our investment decisions are assessed against footprint, which marks the scheme for design, including urban design, environmental sustainability, regeneration, and my favourite, which is the health, happiness, and well-being criteria, with on a scale where 0 is market practice and +4 is exemplary or market-leading practice. The health, happiness, and well-being tag really focuses on the impact of our buildings, both on the people that are going to live and work there, but also our customers that are coming to enjoy space. Our approach is that we involve the whole of our project team in assessing and developing the criteria. So this is less about us dictating how the development should be undertaken, but setting goals and targets for people to achieve that will drive the whole project team to achieving the best standards that we can in sustainability. If I give an example in terms of our environmental sustainability, most of our projects are scoring +2 or 3, which would mean that those projects are saving something like 60 to 70% carbon emissions against the standard that would be for a similar new building built in the UK at that time. So that's against sort of the current building regulations in the UK. Next slide, please. Each of our projects are assessed at 4 key stages. So at feasibility, before we make any decision to acquire or invest in a property at all, during the design and planning, during the construction stage, just prior to completion. So we're checking at that stage that we've got all the management arrangements in place to make sure that the building can benefit from the sustainable features that are built into it post-construction. And then post-occupation, usually a year after the building is fully occupied, we carry out an audit to ensure that the building is performing as we intended it to do whilst it was being built. With regards to standing investments that we buy, they're buildings that are already built or part occupied, and we would still carry out these assessments, particularly the one before we acquire and the post-occupation one. Each of our assessments is independently audited and reported to an independent footprint committee, which is chaired by Sir Jonathan Porritt, who's a UK leading voice on environmental sustainability issues, and including many leading members from the UK in terms of environmental good practice. It's a standing item on all of our board decisions in terms of investment decisions that are made, as well as the commercial return from a particular project. The footprint score and the footprint achievement are also a key criteria for any investment decision that's made. Next slide, please. The whole approach is about yes, it's about improving our environment. But we strongly believe that by taking this approach to development, we are attracting occupiers and customers for our scheme. We're taking a long-term value and taking a long-term view of their property decisions, much in the same way as we accept that our return or commercial return from this project or each project would be taken out in a longer term. Some of the things that we do are around creating a sense of community amongst the people that we work within. So there are things like a community chest where all of the occupiers put a small amount of money to one side to do local good and beneficial things, both for the local community within the particular investment that we've made, but also in the surrounding community to help that business community mix with its neighbours. We take an active management approach to all of our schemes. We put a great deal of emphasis in supporting amenities which are there for the good of all the occupiers, both residents and office workers. We ensure that all of our tenants and customers sign up to a footprint lease, which ensures that we're sharing good practice with them to constantly develop and improve our schemes to take the best use of environmental opportunities that might be. So once the decisions have been made and once the final buildings have been finished and occupiers have come in, we still go back in at a later stage and are doing this on a constant basis to upgrade and improve and reduce energy usage for our customers, our occupiers. We're also in a process at the moment of gathering quite a lot of data about our projects, about the amount of carbon that we're actually reducing from the occupiers that are in the using those buildings, how that is then benchmarked against other schemes in the surrounding area that we've invested in. Next slide, please. It's been quite easy for us to prove on the residential schemes that we've done that we're achieving better market values for our scheme than traditional new build housing schemes in the immediate locality. And what we're now undertaking is a university study to prove similar values that we know from circumstantial evidence is true for our commercial schemes. We feel that our approach is attracting customers, attracting tenants, attracting occupiers, and I'll give a few examples of that, but it seems to me that growing numbers of our customers are aware of the need to take RPI decisions when we're making property decisions, whether that's an awareness of their impact on their environment within the world, or just a concern about long-term energy costs. Their belief is that by taking space in a sustainable or an RPI invested scheme, that they're protecting their long-term business and long-term outgoings. The approach that we've had, and we've used in the publications coming, our Port Tiger scheme in Cardiff, which is a partnership with the Welsh Government, where we were selected as the preferred developer for that scheme on the basis of our footprint policy, and managed to attract the BBC as our first major occupier and built 200,000 square feet of studio facilities on the site, where they produce a range of projects, programs for the BBC, including the Doctor Who franchise. And if you've been watching Doctor Who over the last year, these were all produced in Wales in our building. The investment was sold to the British Steel Pension Fund, and they were attracted and paid a price because they felt that our future-proofing of the building meant that it would grow in value at a greater rate than other projects that they were looking at. And similarly, they wanted to leave a long-term legacy to the area. So there were commercial reasons and sustainable and socially responsible reasons why British Steel were interested in buying that property. we've managed to change the behavior at the BBC, and the building achieved a BREEAM outstanding rating. BREEAM is a UK benchmark for sustainable buildings, and this building achieved outstanding. And to achieve outstanding, you've got to work with the occupier to maximize the potential for the building to make use of its sustainable features. And I'll give an example of what we've worked with the BBC, and that this facility is producing high-definition television. And it's the first facility that the BBC have used in the UK, or built in the UK, where they've used LCD lighting for their studio lots. And they've done this, which not only reduces energy usage in the lighting that they use from the normal sodium lighting that they've been using, but also because of the lack of heat generation, means that the studio spaces no longer need to be air conditioned. And they've done that and been operating there for over 18 months without a single complaint in lighting levels from a single director. And this has meant the BBC now have changed their requirements for new buildings, that they're seeking all of their new buildings that they're working with us to be BREEAM outstanding. I feel that this approach to RPI investment brings ownership of property and visions which would not otherwise be taken by the community. It helps the community to assist us with the management of the building, and overall we're absolutely convinced that it enhances our investment returns. Our investment returns have been pretty steady over these last few years of recession. During this year, we will outperform the IPD index for the UK, and over the next 5 years, through our standing investments without any major new investments being fed into our model, we're expecting that our returns will beat the IPD index, which is our UK-based independent property database index, by some 20%. Thank you. I think that concludes my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Before we move on to questions, I just want to effectively just string together and bring out a few points from all of those presentations. The first point to make is this new report that the PWG is providing. It's fair to say that it aligns with the core property investment function. So whereas our earlier reports were simply a collection of examples, this report tries to follow the buy, sell, hold, and those sorts of issues, which I think is better. Nina mentioned a couple of very interesting points: better communication between stakeholders, a reduction in fragmentation, a reduction in misalignment, effectively better buildings. Laurie, interesting alignment of interests as well, and the fact that they're mandating their investment managers. James showed us some real tangible examples, and Peter just at the end there focused on health, happiness and well-being, something that perhaps has been overlooked in the past, and the independent audit committee to actually demonstrate and prove all the good things, and this long-term view. All very interesting. So there are a couple of questions, but I just want to go in straight away with the first one, given all this good news. I still believe there are a few RPI skeptics, and I just want to pose a question to all our panelists. Do you believe these skeptics are misguided, and do you think there are significant numbers of them? And perhaps just for ease, if I go in the order of the presentation, so perhaps if Nina could give a response to that first. Hello? Okay, I'm not quite sure whether Nina has got that, so perhaps if I move on to Laurie.
Hi, everyone. I have to say I do think that skeptics remain, certainly in the investor world, that is true. It seems that the dissemination of the information that's coming out that really is addressing the core issue, which is performance. What is the impact on performance of ESG integration in real estate investment and management practices? And I would say that there are many fewer skeptics than there have been in the past, because there are more and more concrete, fact-based studies coming out that speak to the cost versus return potential of really focusing on this. I also think more and more people are clearly understanding impacts of climate change vis-a-vis real estate investment decisions. So I would say they're still out there. I would say less and less as we help disseminate more and more information that indicates that the impact on return is either not meaningful or that in fact the impact on return is positive instead of negative over the term of hold of the asset.
Great, thanks, Laurie. I'd rather than go to James and Peter and ask them for the same to answer the same question, I'll just turn it around slightly and say these principles that we've been discussing, and okay, there's a few skeptics, but there are less. But there's a view in the industry that RPI actually only applies to large assets and large portfolios, and particularly institutional portfolios. James or Peter, do you think these principles apply equally to smaller assets and portfolios?
I'll think first as Peter. I think our case studies prove that they work for smaller portfolios. Our portfolio is much smaller than many, and our individual investment decisions are less than £10 million, and you know, many of them, particularly when we get down to our residential schemes, are very small. I don't think the scale of it has any real impact at all. I think this is really the market is starting to change and has changed in that there is a real demand from a lot of customers out there for more sustainable property, and it's a sad reflection of the market that they're not responding quickly enough to see that as an opportunity. We've got a relatively small investment in Leeds, a northern UK city, where we have traditional new build office investments built by other developers in the city standing empty with empty rates liabilities, and our property is filling very quickly on a refurbished mill building which has been designed for this standard, full of businesses that are attracted to our location because it's sustainable.
Perfect, thank you. James, anything to add to that?
Sure, just a quick point. I agree with both of the answers so far. I think the larger organizations, it's easier for them to provide some dedicated resources to understand RPI and help get their business up to speed on this. I think for smaller retail organizations and investors, it's a bit more difficult without a dedicated resource. But I believe that consultants, architects, the industry is becoming a bit more educated about the connection between RPI and the asset value. I think all the studies indicate that it's directionally correct, but you don't have sort of 100% certainty, but the directionality is very strong, and I think we'll only get stronger over time.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, James. Okay, we've probably got about 5 minutes to go, and I want to come to a number of questions that we've received during the presentations. I've got one here from Jimmy Yan. Unfortunately, I don't know where Jimmy is from. I can't help, but he's asking Laurie particularly. Laurie, you mentioned the ESG component in CalPERS's new targeted investments program. It focuses on real assets, namely real estate, infrastructure, and forest land. So, does that targeted investment framework focus on any ESG, on any other assets or strategies?
We have ESG. Hi, Jimmy. You and I have a conference call later next week, I think. Yes, for real assets, the large focus in ESG is on real estate, less so on infrastructure and forest land, although we have very aggressive requirements both in infrastructure and forest land that relate to environmental certifications. The targeted investment programs is focused on those 3 asset classes. our corporate governance staff are focusing on ESG across our large global equity and fixed income portfolios. And Jimmy, I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Laurie. Now then, I have a question from Munish Vasavani. I hope I've mentioned the name right there. Not directed at anyone, so anyone or more than one who wants to take it. And the question is whether any of you assign specific figures for the cost benefits of sustainable investments in your investment appraisal calculations. So I don't know whether anyone wants to take that first. If not, then I guess, I don't know whether Nina is available now on the phone.
Yes, I think that when it comes in relation to specific initiatives that we ourselves have implemented across our assets, in most cases we seek to assess the cost benefits analysis of that, either the benefits accruing to ourselves or in many cases on shorter payback initiatives, the benefits accruing directly to our tenants through service charge, long-term service charge reductions through reduced operating costs. I think both ourselves and probably others on the call would have examples of projects where we've implemented without necessarily the same level of scrutiny around the cost benefits, but they're projects that we think we want to implement or we're trialing, or it's not necessarily done on a cost benefit basis. And the report, when it's published, will contain rather a number of those examples and what the perceived benefits of that be it on a payback period or securing tenants, reducing void rates, greater growth in capital value, protecting capital value. So it's not always that these initiatives are necessarily done on a straightforward cost-benefit basis, but the report definitely shows very strong examples of what the benefits of such initiatives are.
Great, thank you, Nina. I think I'll move on to another question, if that's okay, rather than the same question to other panelists. It is another question from Jimmy, but I think it's an interesting one. So given that we've only got a couple of minutes left, can Laurie elaborate on the ULI report and on the carbon index and how other pension funds could do this?
Yes, that's a great question. CalPERS became a member of the Greenprint Foundation really with the focus of driving our efforts related to ESG through this group. It is a very strong group of privately held, profit-motivated real estate investment managers, and many of them are our external real estate investment managers. So we thought that it was a good fit and alignment. Greenprint is an organization that any investor and any real estate investment manager can join. It is a growing group of people that are focusing their efforts on, at this point, on understanding the carbon footprint of their real estate holdings and trying to drive improvements and energy reduction through understanding the carbon footprint of what is in their portfolio. There is another database that investors and managers can report into, and it's called GRESB, which is Green Real Estate Building Survey. I might have that wrong, forgive me if I do. It's run by Niels Koch out of Maastricht University. I think that is also a very legitimate tool for investors to use as they look at understanding the ESG impacts in their portfolios. So we are looking forward to, once we have a really good view of this question of carbon footprint, we will be driving other ESG efforts through our membership and in coordination and consultation with the Greenprint Foundation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Laurie. It's coming up to the hour. We've just oversailed our hour slot by a couple of minutes. So I guess that just leaves me to thank all of the panelists for their presentations, to Nina, Laurie, James and Peter. Just to reiterate again that a recording of the webinar is available. And I guess if there are any other questions that come to mind in the next few hours or days, then I'm sure our panelists would be happy to answer them. And if you want to direct them through your usual PRI or UNEP-FI contact, then that would be great. So with that, many thanks for your attendance.